For those of you who don't know me, my background is 5 or 6 years in investment banking in Sydney, where I worked on a lot of capital raising and property deals. Following that, I spent about 5 or 6 years working in property finance, financing a number of property developments in Queensland and New South Wales. A lot of that was sort of involved with mortgagee in possession and finishing off constructions and handling builders, etc. In the last sort of 18 months to 2 years, I've moved on to granny flats and building secondary dwellings in New South Wales principally. Now, this has actually given me a lot of experience, and I certainly have seen the good, the bad, and the ugly, hence the title. And tonight I want to share those experiences with you guys so that you can understand what to look out for when looking at building a granny flat, and what to make sure you look at when comparing other providers. Also, I want to take this opportunity to introduce Rebecca Horson. Rebecca has a background. She worked for Apple more recently for about 5 or 6 years and gained a lot of experience there. She also has a passion for property like none I have seen. When she talks about property, her eyes light up. She's done her own subdivision. She's also recently been running a small syndicate of investors and looking at doing renovations, etc. in Brisbane. So Rebecca's joined us probably 4 or 5 weeks ago. She's responsible for our sales, and a number of you would have already spoken to her in the last 2 or 3 weeks. So welcome, Rebecca. Now, what we want to do in this webinar is it's going to last about 40-45 minutes, and everybody is muted, so they can't talk during the webinar for obvious reasons. But what I'm encouraging you all to do is to write down your questions, any questions you have, email them through to Rebecca or myself, or both of us preferably, and we'll get back to you tomorrow. We'll either call you or we'll answer via email tomorrow. So we strongly encourage you to do that, to give us feedback. Now, tonight we're going to go over a number of things. We're going to go through some granny flat strategies. We're going to talk about the Affordable Housing Set legislation, which was introduced in 2008, and explain in basic dummy terms what that means, because there's a lot of misconceptions that go around that. Thirdly, we're going to talk about, this is really a really interesting thing for most people, is how to find a suitable granny flat property. Most people charge for this. We're actually going to tell you tonight how to do that. Fourthly, we're going to talk about design features for a granny flat. We're going to go through all the things from the size of the block to the types of roofs to the kitchens, the bathrooms, etc., so you can compare accurately between different providers and ask the right questions. Then we're actually going to show you a comparison of different granny flat providers in New South Wales and Australia, and I've sort of grabbed some reputable ones off the internet. There's a lot of them around, but we can compare some reputable ones and look at different situations in which they provide certain things and they sort of leave other things out as well. So that's a really good way for you guys to be able to go on the internet and compare what people are providing. Then we're going to go through the granny flat process, what's involved with approval, how long these things take. It's a basic timeline. It's going to talk about construction, how long that takes, how long it takes to get your final certification before your tenant moves in. And then lastly, we're going to go through examples of 8 hot granny flat deals that have made our clients money, and how one particular client was able to put together a development site which was positive cash flow using granny flats. Okay, so we're going to kick off with granny flat strategies. Firstly, granny flat strategies are a really great way for buying an existing house, or if you already own your house. It's a really great way for increasing the yield on that property. Generally speaking, a lot of houses might have 5-6% yield with the existing tenant in there, and by adding a granny flat, you can actually increase the rental yield up to 7-8% plus. Now, once you start getting near 7-8% plus, you're talking cash flow positive on a net basis. So that's pretty exciting in terms of a strategy. another strategy, which we'll talk about an example later on, it's actually you can use it to hold a development site, which is a great way, because most people buy development sites and it has an existing old rundown house on it, and they usually take 1-2 years to get development approvals through council, and then it may take another 1 or 2 years before they get their pre-sales, get their construction certificate, etc., and actually start building, get their pre-sales, get their finance, get their development site underway. So it's a really good way, instead of burning cash and being cash flow negative during that process, you can actually put a granny flat on there and actually increase the cash flow and reduce the holding costs, which is really important as well. Now, a lot of people have been ringing me about superannuation for granny flats. The short answer is it's actually quite difficult to do granny flats in your superannuation because you can't do a construction loan in there. But we've actually worked on a way around that, and we're developing that. And if you want to, personally, if you want to email me or Rebecca, we can have a quick chat to you about that. But it's something we're sort of developing, and we're hoping to have that finalised by the end of October. It'll be a way that we actually will complete the granny flat for you on a new property, and then when it's finished, you can settle in your superannuation fund. Now, in terms of the affordable housing legislation, I just want to give you a bit of a background on how it works, and sort of explain it to you in basic terms. A lot of you might know about this legislation, but basically it's state-based legislation introduced by the New South Wales state government, and the principal idea of it was to boost affordable housing in Australia, or in New South Wales. Now, it was designed for secondary dwellings, also known as granny flats, and the idea behind it was they could be rented out or lived in by relatives or a friend. Now, the distinction there is most councils in Australia say you can have a relative in there, but you can't have a friend in there, and you can't rent it out to a third party. But the legislation in New South Wales, introduced in 2008, enables you to rent it out to anybody, in effect. Now, these granny flats can be attached or detached. All the granny flats that Positive Renovations built are detached, but there's nothing wrong with you actually converting an existing house into an attached granny flat, although it can be quite difficult with fire separation issues. But often what you'll find is people will build something on the back of it, or generally speaking, attached granny flats are built from scratch, because there are fire separation issues and they're quite expensive to get around. So what we've seen people doing is they will build a 3-bedroom house, for example, and attach built at the same time a granny flat on the side of that. It might be like a 40 or a 50 square metre granny flat. So it's a purpose-built, attached, dual income house approved under the granny flat legislation. Another important distinction with the affordable housing legislation, people don't understand this, is it's designed to be approved on any urban residential property. Now, that's R1 zoning, which is a typical residential property, R2, R3, or R4, R5 zoning even, which is high density residential zoning. So if you have a property and it's zoned R5, for example, or even if it's R3 for medium density zoning, and it's got a house on it, you can actually put a granny flat in the backyard. And obviously anything sort of R3 and above is a development site. So it's a great way of holding a development site, which I've discussed earlier. The lot size has to be a minimum of 450 square metres in size and have a 12-metre width as well. Now, if it doesn't meet the 450 square metres, or if it doesn't meet the 12-metre width, it doesn't mean you cannot put a granny flat on that property. All it means is you have to go to council, so council can then assess that site on its merits. People often think if it's not 450, I can't put a granny flat on it. Well, it's not the case. It just comes down to council having to assess a development application. Also, people also know this in terms of the maximum size. It's an internal floor area of 60 square metres. You can have verandas and garages in addition to that 60 square metres, and you can also have external storage as well. There's no formal requirement for additional car parking. It's often a good case to have additional car parking, but you don't actually need to provide additional car parking under the affordable housing granny flat legislation. Also, another thing that's worth mentioning is a lot of people advertise, or granny flat providers advertise, that it takes 10 days to approve a granny flat. Well, it does once it's actually been lodged with a certifier or with council. but it actually takes about 2 weeks to prepare the application, and a lot of people fail to mention that. So when you work out the 10 days for the approval through the private certifier or council, which is 2 weeks, then you add on the 2-week preparation time to submit it to council or to the certifier, you're talking roughly about 4 weeks. So you need to remember it does take 4 weeks to get an approval from start to finish. But once your approval's done, you can start work straight away. It's effectively an approval and a construction certificate all at once. The completed granny flat, also, you need to understand it's important that it can't be subdivided. Sometimes people find these really great properties and they go, oh, great, I can subdivide it off later. But reality is, if you want to subdivide your granny flat off later on, you actually have to have it approved as a dual occupancy, which is a council approval process. And then I've got a number of clients, some of which are listening tonight, which are going through this process. They can actually subdivide it's effectively a granny flat, but it's actually approved as a dual occupancy, not as a granny flat under the affordable housing legislation. So it's an important thing that people need to know. Lastly, I'll just talk about the Section 94 contributions. Councils do have a right to charge them. Originally, when this legislation was put out, the state government put out a bit of a directive and said, hey guys, let's keep this clean. Anything under 100 grand, there's no Section 94 contributions. Well, a lot of councils chose to ignore that, and some in particular, and we've got it in our granny flat brochure, there's probably about 5 or 6 councils that we know of that do charge Section 94 contributions, and they do range anywhere from $3,500 up to $10,000 or $11,000. Byron Bay was charging about $20,000, but they've chosen to delete those now. Because obviously their council is very supportive of affordable housing in that region. In terms of the next thing I want to talk about, this is something that I know everyone will find really interesting. It's how to find a suitable granny flat property. The first thing you need to do when you're assessing whether a granny flat property is suitable is the area selection. It's the first thing you need to look at. Some people rush in and say, oh, okay, let's go do it here because I heard my mate's doing it. They'll listen to their, the neighbour Dave will say, oh yeah, why don't you go build a granny flat in, in Leichhardt or something like that. Oh yeah, that sounds like a great idea. And then they go onto the internet and start looking at properties in that area. What I'll tell you is you've got to listen to experts. You've got to listen to the people in the know. Don't listen to your neighbours. Listen to the facts. Listen to a range of different people. There's plenty of stuff on the internet nowadays. There's plenty of information going around. And I'll go through those experts in the next slide. But it is important to listen to experts, not your neighbour. It's also important to choose an area with combined capital growth and yield. Your Investment Property magazine, which I'm sure a lot of you read in the recent August edition, they went through their top 100 suburbs. And I've just scanned in a section out of there which shows all the New South Wales suburbs. And how they ranked in the top 100. And as you can see, there's a lot of New South Wales suburbs in there. Now, there's some Sydney suburbs which are located closer to the CBD, and then there's more regional suburbs. Now, we've got a lot of clients that we've found granny flat properties for in these areas. It just all depends on where your price and your budget is, etc. So typically, our clients will go for the 350 and under. And the areas that we've found clients granny flats for in the areas of Bathurst, Muswellbrook, Dubbo, Goulburn, Blacktown, Regent Park. Great spots for granny flats, and they're affordable, and it's easy to get really good yields in those areas as well. There's areas like Newtown, for example. If you want to build a granny flat and buy a house there, you'd be looking up near $1 million. So if you've got that sort of budget, it's really good actually to do it in Newtown. Increases the yield there. Byron Bay is not on this list, but that's another fantastic way to buy a property that you want to own with good capital growth in the future, and gives you even better returns. Areas like Granville and North Parramatta used to be really cheap, affordable suburbs. They're now sort of tipping $400,000 or $500,000 just for the house. Great areas, really good growth as well. As you can see, they're ranked quite highly in the top 100, but it just depends on your budget. Interesting that a lot of those properties that we've been finding for our clients are in suburbs that are ranked in the top 100 by Yip magazine recently. Now, in terms of experts, we're talking about people like hotspotting.com.au, Matt Susik, RP Data, great source of information, nexthotspot.com.au, and of course Sam Saggers from Positive Real Estate. Recently, Sam Saggers did a presentation on hotspots, and one of the large areas he talked about was Western Sydney. As you can see from this map, Western Sydney is a large area. It spreads right out west of Sydney, right out back of the Blue Mountains there, and also quite a far bit north of Gosford. It's a strong area. It was ranked 4.5 stars by SQM recently, so it ticks all the boxes. As you can see, the rental yields, there's a rental yield differentiation in Western Sydney compared to the rest of Sydney. It's always maintained a good 1% or close to 1% difference in yields. Now, what this means is with high rental yields, investors are attracted to the area, which pushes up the prices in those areas. It also means that rent, due to the low vacancy rates in those areas, which you can see from this slide, in the light blue, Western Sydney is, it's been sort of around 1.5–2%, and it's getting down to under 1% in 2010, and it's sort of it's always been around sort of 1–1.5%. It needs to be around sort of anything under 2% is quite a strong rental market. When it starts getting around 2–3%, we're talking about equilibrium there in the rental market, and there's about as many people that wanted to rent as there is in terms of supply. So, as you can see, it's a very tight rental market and will continue to do so for a while. Also, in terms of finding the second point I want to talk about in terms of finding a suitable granny flat property, once you've chosen your area, it's important to look at the type of lot as well, and people often overlook this. There's usually, the way I like to sort of look at it, there's about 3 different types of lot types. There's the dual street frontages, which can be rear lane or a corner block. There's the battle axe block, and then there's the standard block. And I'm going to go through some examples of each of these. The first dual street frontage one is the rear lane or street. And you'll see in this example here, which is actually a project we did for a client. The house is located on the main street there, which is Andrews Road, and then there's a rear lane, Jackman Lane, at the back. They were both sealed roads, and we went through a complying development. We didn't have to go through council, and he was able to build a two-bedroom, 37 square metre granny flat on the rear, and the granny flat tenant could access his granny flat from the rear. So the separation of tenants was perfect. Effectively, they didn't know each of them existed. And in my mind, that's actually the best type of granny flat property type you can find. The corner blocks can work well as well. Both, once again, it's a dual street frontage. Corner blocks can work, but you have to keep in mind the neighbours on either side of you. You've got to actually build behind their setback as well. So you'll see in this picture, there's a house to the right hand side on Tooler Place, and there's also a house on the other side as well. So when you actually take into account the setbacks from the neighbouring properties, you're actually limited in where you can build on a corner block. So a corner block is not the best property in my mind, but if you do find the right one, it can be. In this example, you would need to actually remove the garage to build a 37 square metre granny flat in this particular instance. Here's another one, an example of a corner street block which works really well. As you can see, the house is up one end and there's plenty of land on the other street frontage. And in some cases, like in particular, I think this one may even you may be able to actually subdivide off the granny flat, and you wouldn't actually get this granny flat approved as a affordable housing granny flat under that legislation. You would actually do it as a dual occupancy, so you could subdivide it off, and that would then release equity in your property. Here's another example of a corner block. You could actually squeeze in a granny flat in between the garage and the house here, and fence it off separately from the house. And what I usually say to my clients in terms of garages is, if there is a garage, try and keep the garage, because it actually is really good for storage and car parking. And they usually cost between $4,000 and $6,000 to demolish and remove, depending on whether asbestos or not. So they are costly to remove, and they do take away some of the value from the existing property. So if you can, don't remove the garage. Here's another example of a corner block which doesn't work. You can see there's very limited space between the neighbouring house, which is a light grey roof. You couldn't build down that side. The clay-coloured roof on the other side, when you take into account the setback, you can't actually build in front of the house there. You can only build down the side. There's only like a 4 metre space between the side fence and the house. So it's actually very difficult to build a granny flat in this instance, and I'd be recommending, if you were going to buy this property, not to buy it. This is another example of a property type which works really well. It's a battle axe lot. Now, battle axe lots you can get granny flats approved on these under the affordable housing legislation. You just need to make sure you have a 3 metre handle, and the handle is actually the driveway that goes from the street to the battle axe lot. In this instance, it was about 3.5 metres. And also, there's another requirement with battle axe blocks, in that when you remove the driveway or the handle from the property, the remaining lot has to be a minimum of 400 square metres. And in this instance it was, because I think the combined property was about 770 square metres. When you took away the 3.4 metre driveway, which is about 50 metres long, it only took 150 square metres off the 770, which left a balance of 620 square metres. So it definitely met that requirement. And usually with battle axe blocks as well, the house is actually set right to the back, and there's actually a large front yard, and that's where you would build on a battle axe lot. So that's why they work quite well. So they're often overlooked, and they're very good for granny flats, and great for privacy as well. This is the third lot type I talked about, which is the standard lot. Now, most properties you look at, 90% of cases, you'll find these standard housing lots. You have to build them at the back. And also you need to make sure you got side access. So basically the tenants for the granny flats have to walk down the side of the house, and then you have to separate off the fencing in the backyard, and that way the tenants don't overlap. Here's an example of one that works really well. Here's another example of a standard lot which doesn't work as well. As you can see, there's a little garage in that back corner, and there's a line I've drawn at the back there which is a 3 metre setback. And when you take that into account, and there's also a bit of an awning off the back of the house there, it actually gets pretty tight to put a granny flat on in this backyard. Not one that I would recommend. As a rule of thumb, what I say to my clients is, look for a property that has a minimum of 11 metres from the back fence to the back of the house. This way, you take into account your 3 metres you have at the back, which is a rear setback. You've got to allow for 1.8 metres fire separation from the house. That gives you 5.8. And the thinnest granny flat you sort of want to deal with is about sort of 5.5. So that gets you up to about 10.5. So you want to allow about 11 metres at a minimum. And you'll often find how difficult that can be on properties. An important distinction that I want to make with choosing a lot type is really important not to get too hung up on the size of the lot. The most important thing in choosing your lot type is actually the position of the house. Because on all those examples I talked about, if you put the house in the wrong position, then nearly all of those lots are actually not actually suitable for a granny flat. So it is really important, the position of the house. But also a large part, what people sort of forget to look at, is the lot gradient, because unless you go and inspect the property, the lot gradient can actually catch you out. You don't want a lot that slopes to the back, because often it can lead to issues with stormwater runoff off your granny flat, and it's more of an issue, having to go through a council approval process, because what councils will do is they will make you do a stormwater absorption pit at the back, which can be upwards of $10,000–$15,000 in some cases. I've seen those being approved in areas like Padstow. But also, if your gradient's quite large, it can also lead to an increased cost in footing design, retaining walls, etc. So try and find a block that's relatively flat. Next thing I want to talk about in terms of finding a suitable granny flat property is your build zone. So once you've actually chosen your lot type, you decide you've got enough room for your granny flat, you've got to then look at things like your 3 metre setback, which I talked about previously, 3 metres from the rear, 0.9 from the side boundaries, so almost a metre from the side boundaries, 1.8 metres from the existing house for your fire separation, which I spoke about. You've also got to keep 3 metres away from any major trees. So you really need to inspect the property to see if there's any major trees. Now, major trees is sort of typically anything over 4 metres in height. You've also got to be careful of some trees which are protected. There's some date palms, I think they are in New South Wales, protected. There are some types of palms anyway, so you've got to be a little bit careful there. But I generally say to people, hey, if there's trees there, don't worry about it. Just make sure you steer clear of the trees. I'd prefer if you avoid the tree rather than cut it down, because they can actually cost a fair bit of money to cut down as well. And generally speaking, you've got to go through a council approval process to get the tree cut down. And when you do that with a granny flat, they usually say, yeah, that's fine. Why do you want to cut the tree down? And if you say it's for a granny flat, then they ask you then to submit the granny flat approval through council, which then puts you in their ballpark, and they start saying things like, oh, you need to do this, you need to do that. You can add extra costs to building your granny flat. So avoid trees because you can end up in a council approval process, which will cost you money and time. Also, other things when you're looking at your build zone, it's existing structures like I talked about before, garages, sheds, clotheslines, footpaths, retaining walls, also swimming pools as well. You'd be surprised how many backyards have swimming pools and they get in the way of building a granny flat. Another important thing to look at when you're looking at a suitable granny flat property as well is your existing house. Don't overlook the existing house. It's really important. It earns just as much, if not more, rent than your granny flat will. Make sure it's a minimum of 3 bedrooms. 2-bedroom homes don't generally rent for much, so look for 3 bedrooms or more. Often look for a house where you can get 3 bedrooms and there's an opportunity to add a 4th bedroom. I've got a number of clients that have done that. It adds to your rent significantly. Even 5 bedrooms, you can add another couple of bedrooms. Make sure the house is in good condition. Make sure you inspect it. Get a building inspection report. Look for things like rusted out guttering. Looking for things like gyprock that's falling apart inside the house, bad wiring. All these things cost money. Try and find a house that's renovated or partly renovated. You'd be surprised how many houses in the market that are renovated or at least partly renovated. That saves you significant money in the future, and it saves tenants having to call you up and ask you to fix things that don't work. Look for existing structures, which I've spoken about previously, swimming pools, retaining walls. They cost money to move. An important thing is I want to talk about is the purchase contract. The reality is with a purchase contract, you can look through these things yourself, look at things like the planning certificate, title search and sewage diagram. But I've got so many horror stories that have occurred due to people doing this. What I would advise you to do is get an expert to look at it. Planning certificates are quite cumbersome. Every single council has a different planning certificate. They're usually about 13, 14 pages long, and I've looked at hundreds of them, and even when I look at them, I miss things occasionally, and I have to read through them 2 or 3 times to make sure that I haven't missed something. I'll tell you a story recently about a client of mine that actually ended up becoming a client of mine in the end, and I recommended she didn't go ahead with the property. But she was advised to buy a property in Mudgee, and she did the usual checks, checked for flood, fire, heritage, all that sort of stuff, and was about to go ahead and purchase the property. And I had a look at it before she exchanged. And the issue was there was in the fine print there was a conservation area. Now, as soon as you have an issue with a planning certificate, automatically it has to go through a council approval process. Now, this would have cost my client thousands of dollars. Her block was sloping backwards as well, which would have meant she would have had to have actually put a stormwater absorption pit in there, which would have had to have gone through council drainage engineers. So she was probably talking at least $10,000 or $15,000 on top of what she thought was going to cost her $95,000. So it's really important to get an expert to check the planning certificate. We have those experts, and we always get them to check it after Rebecca and I check it as well. Title search is something that people look over as well. I've seen clients who have purchased properties, they've checked the planning certificate, they've checked the sewage diagram, but there was a drainage easement on the property. Now, this is a major problem, having a drainage easement. I've seen it run through plenty of backyards of properties which otherwise would have been fantastic granny flat properties. You can't build within at least a metre of a drainage easement. You can't build over them. Once you've bought a property with one of these on there, you can't build within a metre of it. It can significantly limit the build zone in which you can build your granny flat. The third thing to look at, which once again you really need to get an expert to look at, is the sewage diagram. The sewage diagram will show you where the main sewer, otherwise known as the board sewer, runs through your property. Now, the danger zones is when it runs through your backyard. If it runs along the back fence, it's usually not an issue, but they often run through the middle of the backyard, and these are usually the last things that people check when they purchase a property. It's usually the last page in the contract, and sometimes it's even missing from contracts. Now, sewage, main sewers running through the backs of a property. I've had numerous disaster stories there where clients have bought properties and they thought, oh, it's okay, we can build over this. We'll just encase the sewer. I'll tell you a story about a plumber friend of mine who actually had to encase the sewer, and he dug down. It was about 3 metres deep. You've got to dig right down, and usually you have to dig down and dig out a 7-metre trench. It was about 3 metres deep. As he dug down, with the actual weight lifting off the sewer, these sewers have been there for 30, 40, 50 years, even longer. When he lifted the weight off it, it actually jumped up about half a metre because of the weight of the soil wasn't on it, and that cost significant money to pin that sewer back down again and encase it. You can build, generally speaking, with granny flats, you can build within 2 times the depth either side of a main sewer. So on the sewer diagram, it's usually very, very hard to read these sewer diagrams because they're often very old and they're in feet and inches, and you can hardly read the things. But if you can read it, you've got to stay within 2 times the depth away from the sewer. Most sewers, for example, in Western Sydney, are usually about 1.5, 2 metres deep. So, for example, if it was a 2 metre deep sewer, you'd have to stay 2 metres either side of it. And if you're building 2 metres either side of it, then you don't have any issues with Sydney Water. Sydney Water needs to stamp your plans before you actually get your approval. And this is something that an expert will do firstly rather than last, because if you do it last, it can often mean you've got to change the position of your granny flat. You can build up to 0.6 of a metre within the centre line of a sewer, but you have to get the sewer pegged out, and you need to design deeper footings that go at least below the depth of where the sewer is. I've had a number of clients do this. The extra cost is only about $1,000. So if you do have a property, an existing property that has a sewer on it, we can build up to 0.6 metres from the centre line of the sewer, and it's not really an issue and it's not too costly. The other considerations you need to take into account when you're finding a suitable granny flat property are tenant issues. We often we recommend that when you're buying a granny flat property, you actually buy it in vacant possession, because you can have issues with tenants who don't let you actually go on site before you settle. For example, I've had tenants basically kick surveyors off 2 or 3 times and say, I don't care what's in the contract. Basically, I'm a tenant here. I've got another 4 weeks left. You're not going on site. So what I recommend is also with existing tenants as well. If you do buy it with the existing tenant in as well, it does create issues in that they did have a full backyard and all of a sudden you're taking away part of their backyard. It can sometimes create issues in that they were paying, for example, $300 a week, and now you're taking away half their backyard and they're saying, well, why am I paying $300 a week still? They usually want a rental discount. If you get a vacant possession, you can often find a tenant for almost the same price, the weekly rent you were getting before you actually remove the tenant. And that's happened probably 100% of the time actually with tenants that I've found. For example, in Western Sydney, you're getting $300 a week, settle vacant possession, put a new tenant in. You actually show the tenant the plans. You give them a copy of the build zone map, show them exactly where it's going. You put up the fence before you start construction, and they pay the same rent nearly in every case. So it is worth getting vacant possession. Also worth considering car parking as well. You'll often find there's not enough room for car parking for the granny flat tenant, but it's actually worth looking at where you can put it in. Sometimes you'll find it on a driveway if it's wide enough. you can actually put one car park to the right, one to the left, do a line down the middle, and say one's for the tenant, one's for the granny flat. Generally speaking, most of the driveways are quite long, and you can't sort of double stack car parks behind each other. Another way you can do it is you can actually park off the main driveway onto the lawn and create an area with some sort of blue stone or something like that, and actually corner it off with or separate it off with some planks or something like that, with some wood, so that it's separated off from the lawn. That works well. Another way, if you can actually get the car out the back, if you've got enough room down the side, it's actually good creating a driveway down the side of the house, so the granny flat tenant can actually park at the rear next to their granny flat. But definitely worth considering, even though you don't need to provide car parking under the affordable housing SEP. It's actually very handy to have that extra car parking for the tenant. Now, the fourth thing I want to talk about is granny flat design features. Now, this is important when you're comparing different granny flat providers. Obviously, people provide different sizes, and when you're comparing apples with apples, some people might provide a 60 square metre, and you go, okay, I want to compare that to other people in the market, but you'll find other people might be 54 square metres or 52 or 48. Now, you can't compare these apples to apples. You need to actually work out a rate per square metre and then multiply that by 60, say, if you're looking for a 60 square metre, so you can work out an equivalent price. And I'll do that very shortly in about 2 or 3 slides. Now, the roof type, there's 3 types of roofs, as you can see from the pictorial here. There's your standard gable, which has 2 sides. There's your skillion roof, which has 1 side. There's your full hip roof, which has 4 sides and a ridge along the top. I think the full hip roof's the best roof. It's a standard roof. You see it on most houses. That's what we provide in all our granny flats. Eaves is an important thing. That's the actual the space between the walls and the underside of and the edge of the roof. It's what gives your windows and doors shelter when it rains. Some providers don't have any eaves at all. Some have some eaves on one side and not on the other. A lot of them provide 450mm eaves. Some provide 600. We provide 600 metres, 600 mil eaves on all sides, which is really important for weather, keeping rain out of your windows. You can leave your windows open, and it's sufficient in terms of being able to keep the rain out. Also, I've seen some granny flat designs that have eaves, but the eaves are on the window sides, and there's no eaves where the door is, which is ridiculous. Windows, in terms of design features, got single glazed or double glazed. Usually, I've said they're single clear. Some windows are tinted. It just depends on the BASIX requirements. In New South Wales, all new dwellings have to meet BASIX requirements, including granny flats. If you live in a particular area that is prone to extreme heat or cold, BASIX requirements would generally require double glazing, but 99% of the time, single glazed clear is fine. In terms of cladding, there's 3 most common ones: party plank, weather text, and vinyl planks. Vinyl planks are plastic. I think they're cheap and nasty. I'd steer clear of them. I've noticed a lot of granny flat providers, in particular one who's a major granny flat builder in New South Wales, he does vinyl planks. I'd imagine they'd warp and discolour over time. Party plank's a common one. That's a fibre cement sheeting. It's pretty good, but it can be a bit old school looking. Weather text is my preferred. That's what we provide. Weather text comes pre-primed in 200 and 300 mil widths. It goes on really quickly. Paint's really good. Looks fantastic. Another consideration is layout. You've got to look at the layout of the granny flat. Does it work in terms of the living area, the living space, the kitchen? Can you actually fit furniture in it? Can people actually get into the bathroom without going through a bedroom? Things like that. Is the kitchen big enough? Does it work? Where you enter the granny flat, does it work in terms of providing a functional living space? Kitchen's important as well in terms of design features. Some kitchens are sort of overlooked. People look at the floor plan and go, oh, that looks fine. You've got to look at things like, are there overheads included? You can't see those on a floor plan. They're really important for storage. Vinyl wrap doors or 2-pack, I don't think are very good in terms of an investment granny flat. Vinyl wrap can be, it's basically a shrink wrap cover over the melamine door. With vinyl wraps, they can actually get damaged and peel off quite easily. 2-pack can get chipped. My preference is laminate. You can get stone bench tops, which are nice. They're actually quite cheap nowadays. They're usually about 10 mil thick with most providers, but most granny flat providers do laminate bench tops. We do as well. And we provide full overheads as well for storage. Bathrooms are a really important thing that people don't look really into as well. You've got to make sure there's a laundry included as well. Most of them are in the bathrooms. Under Building Code of Australia guidelines, you actually have to have a space for a washing machine and a laundry tub. If not, and I've seen lots of designs on the internet that are advertised for New South Wales, you've got to have a washing machine and a laundry tub for overflow from the washing machine. If not, it's illegal. Tiling in the bathroom, it's important. Make sure they're tiling in around the shower area on the floor. Make sure there's a skirt. Shower screens, some people don't have the shower screens. They just have the shower curtain. So make sure you ask those questions. Vanity as well. Make sure the vanity is not a cheap and nasty thing from China. We do custom-made vanities as well as our kitchens as well. All our kitchens are made custom-made. They're actually cut on a computer and everything lines up perfectly. And our vanities match our kitchens as well. Storage is a really important thing for granny flats. If you've ever lived in a small unit, you'll know what I'm talking about. You've got to make sure you've got built-ins in all bedrooms, and you've also got some basic laundry storage as well, even if it's just under the tub. And storage is also important in your kitchen. Electrical layout, make sure you look at the electrical layout. Make sure there's sufficient double and single power points and that it's functional. Make sure there's enough power points in your kitchen to plug your fridge in, your microwave, and your exhaust as well. Flooring, most people provide timber laminate throughout. It wears well. They come with 20 to 25-year guarantees nowadays. Tiling in the bathroom, obviously that's standard. Some people provide carpet in the bedrooms. I actually think that that's not a good thing with an investment property because it often gets wrecked and needs cleaning. Other things are important you've got to look at, and they're often left out. Things like air conditioning. Most people don't provide air conditioning. Clotheslines, TV antennas, fly screens, often provided. Blinds, usually not. Landscaping is often provided, but you need to ask what's provided in landscaping. It often only includes just a bit of grass and fencing as well. People say they include fencing, but it's usually limited to about 8 metres and it's not sufficient. So they're important things to look at in terms of comparing granny flat providers in terms of the design features. Here I've done a comparison with various providers and I've compared it to what Positive Renovation provides. Here I've compared Positive Renovation 60 square metre granny flat, which includes full approvals and project management. We don't have landscaping and blinds included in our standard package. A lot of people don't include them. We've compared it to a granny flat provider, package provider number 2. You'll see there in the second column. Their largest one was a 52 square metre granny flat at $110,000. Didn't have aircon. Total price was $111, but because it was actually a 52 square metre one, I worked out the rate per square metre multiplied by 60, and the 60 square metre equivalent price was actually $128,000, which is quite expensive. A major hardware provider there I've got there in the third column, which is Bunnings. They have 3 designs, SS1, 2 and 3. Important to note there with their designs is I've actually showed you the internal floor area there, not including their verandas, which can catch people out. When you add in the floor system in there, actually that doesn't even include the footing system, so it actually would be more expensive. And also the next kit provider I've showed there as well, which is probably at least another $3,000 or $4,000. By the time you add in their fix-out kit, because basically their kit for $48,000 doesn't include anything but the shell. When you add in the fit-out kit, so the fix-out kit, which is all your gyprock, your doors, your skirts, architraves, etc., and your flooring, and your fit-out kit, which is all your kitchens and bathrooms and all your appliances, etc., didn't have AC either. Put in your labour. That's actually an average labour price. I've dealt with a whole heap of tenders in New South Wales. That's about the average labour price to put one of these things together. Add in approval and project management, and you're well over $120,000 for their 64 square metre. Scale it down to a 60 square metre, you're looking at $116,000. So it's actually quite expensive when you look at the retail price of $48,000. The next column there, the second last column, which is another major kit provider in Western Sydney. This is great if you want to do it yourself. It ends up being quite comparable to our price, but you can see there's a lot of things they don't include, and these are things that you get caught out by being a consumer. They don't have, for example, fly screens or TV antenna, clothesline, air conditioning, shower screen, built-ins, eaves, hot water systems, flooring, or landscaping, project management or approvals. These are things you've got to add back in. So it's important to have a look at these things. The last thing there I've also done in the last column is another major granny flat provider in New South Wales. They've been established for a long time in Western Sydney. They sort of provide everything except for a TV antenna and aircon and landscaping, and they started at 115,000. So just gives you an idea of various providers and how to compare them to what we provide. The process, in terms of one of the last things I want to talk about is the granny flat process. I've spoken about this before. Granny flat approvals take about 4 to 5 weeks. Once you do your initial site inspection, your preparation of approved plans, and your certification of plans, you then can start construction. You sign your building contract, but it does take about 3 weeks, 2 or 3 weeks for materials to turn up, and then construction can typically take about 8 weeks. Most building contracts allow 21 business days before construction starts. And then once it's finished, it can take about 2 weeks for final certification before your tenant can move in. Now, the last thing I want to go through with you guys is talking about some great granny flat deals that we've done for clients, to give you some real life examples. Here's a 37 square metre 2-bedroom granny flat in Padstow. The house was achieving rent. It was an owner occupier, equivalent rent of about $500 per week. On her purchase price of that property, it was about a 4.7% yield. If you add in the $350 a week rent she was getting for the 2-bedroom, 37 square metre granny flat, she had a combined gross yield of 7%. So there's a large increase there. Here's another example of another 37 square metre 2-bedroom granny flat, which was built out at Valentine, out in northern Newcastle. It was in a coastal town. It had views of the water. The owner had actually paid a fair bit for that property, well over $500,000, and the house was only getting rent of $350 a week. So it had quite a low yield, 3.5%. But when you add in the rent for the granny flat, it increased the yield up to 5.2%. Here's another example of a 60 square metre 2-bedroom granny flat we built recently in Campbelltown. The client was getting $350 a week for the house, which was about a 7.2% yield. When you add in the rent for the granny flat, they were getting 9.5%, which is a very good, strong yield. And the client was also going to do some renovations on the house, which would have increased the rent from $350 probably up to about $400, $450. Here's another 60 square metre 2-bedroom granny flat in Kurri Kurri. If you guys don't know where that is, that's sort of western Newcastle, out near Cessnock, just before Cessnock. This client actually only paid $150,000 for this house and was getting $285 per week. They did spend about $20,000, $30,000 on renovating the house, which is what I usually recommend clients do if they can, which is another advantage of getting it back in possession. Now, the rent alone without the granny flat, she was achieving 9.4% gross yield. When you add in the rent for the granny flat, she was getting well over 11%. So that's a fantastic deal one of our clients has done. And it's a great example of finding the right property in the right area. This is a really great example of how to find a development site. This is one that we recommended to a client. There was 2 houses for sale. She ended up buying the first house for about $230,000. It was actually had termites in it, and it was achieving really good rents of about $400 per week, at a 9% yield. This usually would have sold for about $310,000, $315,000, but in the end, it was purchased for $230,000. Bought the property next door for $270,000, which also had termites in it. It was on the market for $310,000. The combined yield was about 2.6% if you added a granny flat on the back of each of those properties. And then you've got a fantastic cash flow positive property, which you purchased all in, including the granny flat, $670,000. Now, you can get a DA on that site and you can sell it for probably $800,000, $850,000, because you can put 5 townhouses on that. So it's a fantastic example of how you can use granny flats to hold a development site cash flow positive. Here's another example of another 37 square metre, 2-bedroom granny flat in Western Sydney in Emerton. House was getting 310, 6.7% gross yield at a granny flat for $250 a week, 9.2% combined gross yield. Another one in Lethbridge Park, similar, $330 a rent for the house, $250 for the granny flat, 9.2% gross yield again. These are all cash flow positive. Here's another really great example of something we did for a client in Moranbah, which is in northern Queensland. They were getting $1,500 a week for this house, which is unbelievable. Which was 12% on market rent. On market value of that house today. Based on the purchase price, it was well over 25-30% return. Now we've just had a DA approved granny flat, and we're the first ones to have that done through Isaac Regional Council. It'll actually rent for about $700 a week, which will be a 24% gross yield on the cost of that granny flat, including all the approvals. So fantastic outcome for that client. Just to finish off, guys, we've got a special webinar offer tonight. Anyone who orders an initial site inspection, you just click through that link there, or if you'd like us to find a granny flat property through the Positive Real Estate Buyers Agency, anyone that clicks on that link, fills out the form in the next 30 days, will be eligible for an upgrade on the purchase of their Positive Renovations granny flat. We're upgrading tapware to Growy, which is a great brand, and we'll also upgrade the appliances to Westinghouse as well. So you just need to click on that link. It'll take you through to that landing page, fill out the information, and we can help you out with getting you on your way to building a granny flat or finding a suitable property. Now, if any of you have had trouble seeing the webinar tonight, then we'll put a link on our website tomorrow, and you can actually download the webinar. We've recorded it tonight to make sure you can see it and go through the information we presented tonight. Rebecca will also be calling all of you tomorrow as well to discuss any questions or things you want to know about our granny flats. Thank you guys for listening tonight. I really appreciate it. I hope you all have a good night, and we look forward to working with you in the future.